Hello, I'm Joel Blackford with Beth Hassett Sabbath Fellowship in St. Paul, Minnesota. We're returning one more time for another video. This is video number 4 in our series. These are biblical, historical, and prophetic patterns over the last thousands of years. So we've gone back and we've addressed 6,000 years ago, and then we've broken it into 2,000-year increments, then 1,000-year increments, then 700-year increments, then 7-year increments, and which are Shemitas, and then 49, 50 years, which is the Jubilees. We've looked at Daniel 9. We've looked at Bollinger's 490-year increments. Then we've looked at patterns that are forward from Yeshua's death and resurrection. So if you haven't seen videos 1, 2, 3, you really should see those before you watch this video, because it's hard to jump into history and just go, oh yeah, this is the Middle Ages, and it's just easy to figure out what's going on because there's a lot of history that leads up to this point. So let's show you some of that history. So once again, we're discussing from 70 AD to 560 to 1050 to 1540 to 2030. Right now we're at that 1050 to 1540 time frame. It's the Dark Ages. You can't read the Torah in Hebrew, and you can't read the Bible in English or whatever language you would read in, say German. This is a dark, dark time. But we're starting to come out of that, and you'll see some of that come out first via the Jews. So we'll investigate Judah ben Samuel during this time frame. Yeah, I think you'll enjoy the whole talk. This is a sweep of history, people, and so if you enjoy history, and keep in mind, this isn't really that biblical. I mean, this picture, this diagram will be biblical, but I'm showing you a comparison to this original Daniel 2 dream, but it doesn't necessarily apply. Let's see if we can get it to apply. Let's look at the head of gold, which is Nebuchadnezzar. The arms of silver and the midsection are Cyrus. Okay, that's fine. Then Alexander is of Greece, and he's the belly and thighs of brass. And then the legs are the Caesars. They're the Romans. Then we continue on with the papal system and things like that, and that goes through to Justinian I, which is 70 through 560, and he dies in 560. Well, he dies technically in 565, but things are falling apart, and he's the last Roman emperor. So the last of that iron, sophisticated beast, we'll call it, dies off at that point in time, and then it kind of morphs into this iron and clay that just doesn't mix together very well. Then we have the schism at 1050, so we just concluded that, and that is Pope Benedict IX, and he is a wicked pope, and he caused that. So he's the figurehead of the break between the East and the West, the schism. Then, and you could argue backwards and forwards that the Caesars are very similar to Justinian, and Alexander would be very close to the Pope in terms of the schism. Alexander, when he died, he forced a schism, and 4 leaders took over after him. So keep in mind, that's a great schism, and so they do correspond to each other in a biblical format. And also keep in mind that it's the quiet time of the Bible, from Daniel 9, or rather from Daniel's dream of Daniel 2, and then also he has the dream again in 7. But in this case, it's not written about much in the Bible. That quiet time frame from Malachi until John the Baptist, it's very, very quiet, people. So comparing again Cyrus to Suleiman the Magnificent, we'll show you him. He's a very interesting one. He is not a believer in Yeshua or God. He's a Muslim fellow. But it's very interesting that he's comparable to Cyrus. He is an anointed man to do what he does. And we'll show you that through 1540. Then the final leader will be like Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold. He will unite everything, the beast, the Antichrist, you call him. So it does compare. It's somewhat biblical, but it is a sweep through history that's very, very interesting to see the comparisons and see how things fit together with these patterns. Now, so we're going to jump in real quick because we're getting into modern history here. During this time of the Crusades and during these times of the Muslims coming up towards Europe and almost taking over Europe, you have a flourishing time frame for the Jews. And you have Judah ben Samuel. So these mystical Jews that are wonderful Torah keepers are flourishing. And for some odd reason, they're left alone. So he is born in 1140. He dies in 1217. He lives 77 years. Just keep in mind, when I'm looking at really, really cool Jewish mystics, they live 77 years. And I'll show you another one later on. His last name will be Goren, and you'll be intrigued by him. So this is an artist's recreation of his prophecy of 10 Jubilees. He started prophesying in 1217, his death year. He said there will be 300 years, which is 6 Jubilees, until 1517, and then the Turks will take over control of Jerusalem. And so there will be that dividing point in 1517. Interesting. Then 400 years, the rule of the Ottoman Turks. Then they will lose control in 1917. Then Jerusalem will be a no man's land for 50 years, which is 1967. Then things will change and Israel will control it for that next Jubilee. Then the Messiah takes over at the end of that Jubilee, which was 2017. And nothing occurred that we know of in 2017. But it's just interesting to note this is his prophecy in terms of a timeline. And here's another analysis of it, and this is where they're going through they're sweeping through everything. Okay, so 4,008 years, 1992 years, and they're saying, oh, here's when the millennium hits, and they're predicting 2017 based on Judah Ben Samuel's. I love all these oddball guesses. It's fun to look at them. You've seen the Jubilees, and they're doing their math, and you can pause this video if you want to and dig through this. I disagree with everything that they're talking about, but they really believe 2018 is the time that kicks it off, and the 70th or the seventh week, the last week, occurs after 2018. It's really interesting to 2025. That's his creation of what he thinks is going to occur. Once again, they're all wrong, and I'll never give you a date at all. I'll just show you these things and laugh at them. But everybody tries. I'm showing you patterns. I have no idea of what's going to happen tomorrow. I have no idea of when the Messiah is going to return, but I show you patterns, and I hope that you will be edified by learning something about history too. So now we have to discuss the blood moon tetrads just a little bit. So tetrad means set of four. And some of them are partial, some are full. I'll show you a set that most of the big ones are full eclipses, but some of them are partial eclipses. So I want to set that up because there is one set that's very, very interesting. A blood moon tetrad is when 4 total lunar eclipses take place in succession with no partial lunar eclipses in between. A blood moon tetrad is very rare, but it is especially rare when all 4 blood moons fall on the 4 feasts of the Lord, these 4. So it's Passover, Sukkot, Passover, Sukkot. Okay, in 2014-2015, we'll encounter a blood moon tetrad aligned with the Feast of the Lord, along with 2 solar eclipses that also fall on very significant dates. Now, keep in mind, the person that pioneered this and found this was Mark Biltz. And so I love Mark dearly. He's a very close friend of mine. He takes my phone call, which is amazing. And he also wrote the foreword for my book. Wonderful man, love him so much, and so he found this, and he continues to say we are in a transition time frame in 2018-2019. So he's right, but we don't know what the next day will bring. We don't know, and he never prophesies anything like that. So Judah Ben Samuel, let's get back to him real quick. And so he's born in Speyer in 1140. He died on February 22nd of 1217 in Regensburg. He was one of the fathers of Hasidic Judaism, a movement of Jewish mysticism in Germany. And he was different than other mystics, where he emphasized strong moral ethics and prayer. And many of my friends today that are Orthodox Jews hold to what he believes, which is mysticism, which is just reading the Torah, people, okay? But yet I would call them charismatics in many, many ways. When they're screaming, Messiah, return now, soon, Messiah, soon, now, they're hastening his return, and they sound like charismatics. They do. So he was 55 when he started writing some of his important books, the Sefer Hasidim, the Book of the Pious, the Gematriot, which is a gematria on astrology, HaKavod, which is a book of glory. And so these books are lost in some cases, but it's amazing what he wrote. He was quite an author. So these years were the time of Roman Christian. I put Christian in green here because it's kind of a death of Christianity at that point in time. These are the Crusades into the Holy Land. They took more pleasure in raping Jews than they did in attacking Muslims and kicking them out of the Holy Land. It was a horrible time frame from 1096 to 1270. So during this time frame, as we're studying the blood moon eclipses, and we're also, because those are kicking off during this time frame, we also need to see that the Crusades were going on during Rabbi Judah Ben Samuel's time frame. But there was a flourishing correspondence carried back and forth from Jerusalem and Europe, and the rabbis in Worms and Regensburg and Germany, they were all getting information, and so the Muslims were kind of helpful in this too, which is very interesting. So just keep it in mind, Judah Ben Samuel began publishing his biblical calculations called the Gematria, plus his astronomical observations gave us a summary, which we can read today. So here's his prophecy, his literal prophecy, and it does fit together with the blood moon eclipses, so I'll show you how that fits together. That's why I spent a minute and taught you about that at first. Judah Ben Samuel, when the Ottomans, the Turks, who were already in power to be reckoned, with the Bosphorus at the time of Judah ben Samuel, conquer Jerusalem in 1517. They will rule over Jerusalem for 8 jubilees until 1917. Afterwards, Jerusalem will become a no man's land for 1 jubilee until 1967, and then in the 9th jubilee it will come again back into the possession of the Jewish nation, which would signify the beginning of the Messianic end time, then in 2017. So, interesting. This is what the Ottoman Turks looked like in 1450. So during the time just after Judah ben Samuel, they dominate, and keep in mind also that the Ottoman Turks were more friendly to Jews than the Christians were. The Christians were brutal to the Jewish people, especially the rabbis. If they didn't convert, they were killed or tortured or beaten or whatever it was. It was horrific. And the Turks, in most cases, the Ottomans, would just charge a hesed tax, just an amount that you would have to pay in a tax, which is better than losing your life or being beaten to death. So here's another picture of the Ottoman Turkish Empire from 1300 to 1700. It just grows and flourishes, and it as you see the schism occurring. Remember how we went through that in the last video? The schism occurred in 1050 and officially was announced in 1053, 1054. But this caused this Turkish, the Ottoman Empire, to head towards Europe, and there you can see them almost into Vienna. They took over Budapest and Belgrade and many of these other cities south of there. So they cut across from many different directions. They also took over Spain at one point in time. The first caliph of the Ottoman Empire was Selim I. So that would be like saying peace one. Selim I, Ottoman Turkish. He was the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire from 1512 to 1520. His reign was notable for the enormous expansion of the empire, particularly his conquest between 1516 and 1517 of the Egyptian Mamluk Sultanate, which included all of the Levant. The Levant is a code word for saying Israel. Okay, and then these other locations. On the eve of his death in 1520, the empire spanned a huge section and grew so fast. That's from via Wiki. Continuing on with some more Wiki information, the rise of the Caliphate, Selim's conquest of the Middle Eastern heartlands of the Muslim world, and particularly his assumption of the role of guardian of the pilgrimage routes to Mecca and Medina, established the Ottoman Empire as the most prestigious of all Sunni Muslim states. So there's Shia on one side, and the Sunnis are generally the Arab people. Yeah. His conquest dramatically shifted the empire's geographical and cultural center of gravity away from the Balkans and toward the Middle East. By the 18th century, Selim's conquest of the Mamluk Sultanate had come to be romanticized as the moment when the Ottomans seized leadership over the rest of the Muslim world, and consequently Selim is popularly remembered as the first legitimate Ottoman caliph. The leader, the most powerful, like a Caesar. And so this is via Wiki again. In early 1516, the Ottoman Turks, wary of danger with an alliance between the Mamluks and the Persians. Remember, the Persians are more like so there's the Sunnis and the Shiites. So the Persians are more like the Shiites at that point in time. I can't tell you sure that in an assured way that there were Shiites at that point in time, but I would say that they were different, and they're. I stayed in a house. I managed a foreign student house during the 70s and 80s, and during that time frame, the Shiites and the Sunnis were friendly, but not really that friendly, and they're not now. Based on Iran wanting to take out many of the Sunni locations, the countries around them, that there is this angst between the two of them. So on September 21st, the Mamluk governor of Damascus fled the city, and then on the 2nd of October in 1516, it was announced that Selim I would take over the city. He stayed there for a long time. By December, he left Damascus, and he was in conquest of Egypt, and little appeared to have changed in the city. One army had simply replaced another. However, in his return in October of 1517, that is a Jubilee year, the Sultan ordered the construction of a mosque, takia, and a mausoleum at the shrine of whatever, and this was to be the first of Damascus' great Ottoman monuments. The Sultan al-Sharif, whatever, was the last Mamluk ruler. Selim I of the Ottoman dynasty, effectively bringing the end of 250 years of Egyptian rule. In 1516, the Sultan Selim I arrived outside Jerusalem. Mark that time on your schedule. That this is important. The leaders of the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities welcomed him with opened arms. Hence, there was no bloodshed, and he walked in very calmly, peacefully, like his name states, Salem, like Solomon. There was no forceful conquest. Continuing on, in reality, the people of Jerusalem were greatly relieved to see the Turks and gladly handed over the Sultan the keys of the city. Being a pious man, it was said upon seeing the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, Salim jumped off his horse, got on his knees, and he walked. Just like a later person, we'll call him Allah Navi, and he said, "Thanks be to God, I am the possessor of the sanctuary of the first Qibla, the house of God." And keep in mind, this is that same time frame when Luther, in October 31st of 1517, that Judah ben Samuel said things would kick off this time frame. But then also Luther would be publishing his 95 Theses, and the Torah would start to be printed on the Gutenberg presses. So this was an important Jubilee time frame. That's Salem 1. And also, it's the midpoint between two tetrads, and I'll show you that later on. That's why I spent a minute explaining the tetrads so that you'd be able to see how that fits in. Okay, so there's the picture of Luther nailing his 95 Theses, which is mostly about 3 or 4 different things. He really didn't nail 95 items. It was more like, it was seven things. So at that point in time, in 1517, as I mentioned before, we have the Torah start to be printed because Gutenberg his press is very popular and is being used all throughout Europe. And so you have a guild sect set up. And so it was invented in 1444. But by this time in 1517, they started to print out the Bibles. And that's what flourished. That's what caused this great awakening during that time frame after the Jubilee of 1517. So now we get to Salem I's son, Suleiman, like St. Solomon, the Magnificent, Salem's son. So he set up the rule for 400 years, the Salem did. But then in the 16th century, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent ruled the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire included Turkey, the Middle East, and some of southern Europe. He conquered well up in Europe. In 1517, the Ottoman Turks, under Suleiman's father, Salem I, gained control over Jerusalem. Suleiman Shalom, son of Abraham, and he was, however, respected the Jewish people and made a Jew, the Duke of Naxos, his foreign affairs minister. These are nice men to the Jews, nicer than the Christians are. Over 15 years after his accession, Suleiman records that he was troubled by a series of dreams. These are interesting dreams. In these dreams, he was being chased by lions who seemed intent on devouring him. In one dream, he finally stopped running and faced the lions, asking what he should do to save his life. He was told he should build the wall of Jerusalem. Wondering about this, he asked the only deity he knew, Muslim Allah, for guidance. The response came in a dream, which was recorded as follows. And here's the picture of the lions chasing him in his dreams. And then his answer from the lions from Allah in this case. The prophet appeared to him in a blessed night and told him, "O Suleiman, you will have the rulership for 46 years, and he did, and make many conquests. Your offspring will not die out until the end of time. My kindness will always extend to you. You should spend these spoils on embellishing Mecca and Medina and for the fortification of the citadel of Jerusalem." It's interesting that it came at this time, in order to repulse the unbelievers when they attempt to take possession of Jerusalem during the reigns of your followers. And this happened in 1535. Very interesting. You should also embellish its sanctuary with water basins and offer annual money gifts to the dervishes there, and also embellish the Rock of Allah and rebuild Jerusalem, such being the order of the Prophet. Suleiman Khan rose at once from his sleep and sent from his spoils 1,000 purses to Medina and another 1,000 purses to Jerusalem. Now that's interesting. So that's from Alden Hillenbrand. And what I want you to be aware of is that this is 1535, and he does not go down to Jerusalem. He sends his men down there to do the work. He stays up in Europe and keeps on fighting, and he almost conquers Europe. He does very, very well, but he's repulsed in Vienna. So I'm comparing Suleiman to Nehemiah, and his history doesn't rhyme, it doesn't repeat, rather it rhymes. So notice that the terms of the arrangement here were that Jerusalem was to be rebuilt along with the wall or fortifications, that water dispensers or basins or mikvahs for baptisms and fountains were to be provided. The wall the Suleiman built is the wall which currently surrounds Old Jerusalem. And the Lion's Gate commemorates the lions in this dream. If Daniel 9:25 prophesies rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls in Nehemiah's time, okay, It testified to the first coming of the Messiah and was still standing when Jesus rode on a donkey in fulfillment of Zechariah 9:9. Then, perhaps, Suleiman's rebuilding of the wall might announce a similar prophetic plan relating to Messiah's second coming. It repeats, guys. And here is what I have been able to ascertain. Without the 1539-1540 tetrad sequence, the last 8 tetrads in 2,000 years appears to be happenstance. My research gives order to the tetrad phenomenon. My hint is that Daniel the prophet mentions rebuilding the streets and a wall, forever linking Nehemiah, Passover 446 BC, and Suleiman's troops 1539-1540 with significance. It happens the same way between Nehemiah and Suleiman. They're both blessed in many, many ways. The building period for the wall was generally given as being between 1535-1536 until the end of 1541 or beginning of 1542, but it's 7 years, total of 7 years, yes. And it seems that the 4 fountains or water dispensers or basins were built first. So it always is the case that the water is found first. And we'll show you that in 1867 too. This was presumably so that the workers of the wall could be refreshed and have an assured supply of water for the wall's construction. The various dates are as follows. The fountain on the gate of 29th of June, 1536. The fountain here of St. Stephen's Gate, the Lion's Gate, on 1936 in June again. Okay, and then the fountain of Sabil al-Wad in 1536, late in December. The fountain of Sabil and the El Nazir Gate is 1537. Then the North Wall, 1537. The Jaffa Gate, 1538. The Damascus Gate, 1538. Lion's Gate, 1538, 1539. Herod's Gate, 1539, the South Wall, 1540. The completion seems to be 1541, 1542. So when is the Eastern Gate done? And I'll show you both Eastern Gates. That'll be interesting for you, so that only the Messiah can enter in them. Okay, so Suleiman became a prominent monarch of the 16th century Europe, presiding over the apex of the Ottoman Empire's economic, military, and political power. Suleiman personally led Ottoman armies in conquering the Christian strongholds of Belgrade and Rhodes, as well as most of Hungary, before his conquests were checked at the siege of Vienna in 1529. He annexed much of the Middle East in his conflict with the Safavids and the large areas of North Africa, far west as Algeria. Under his rule, the Ottoman fleet dominated the seas from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and through the Persian Gulf. That's from Wiki. Now, let's look at it in terms of 1540 and 1494. Let's look at it and say those are 46 years, but it's 23 to and from 1517. So, in 1539-1540, Common Era, a rare astronomical tetrad of partial eclipses, 4 lunar eclipses on these Jewish feast days. This is Passover Sukkot of 1539-1540. As Suleiman the Magnificent, yes, he's a Muslim, sends men to rebuild Jerusalem's walls. Why? Suleiman is winning battles in Hungary, where there's food and water, and his troops abruptly leave for Jerusalem, where there was no food or water, to seal the Eastern Gate for the last 490-year time frame. Yes, he had an appointment from God. Lions were sent to him in these dreams to seal the Eastern Gate for the last 490-year time frame. And so remember, the 490 is 70 times 7. It's a vow, okay, that sets off the final 490-year time frame that leads us down to 2030. And Ezekiel 39:7 accounts for the last 7 years that will factor in either before or after 2030. So let's set this up in terms of the blood moons that I've already discussed with you and show them in context of this Jubilee of 1517 and what's going on with 1539, 1540. So in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, no doubt about it, but that was during the Spanish Inquisition. So he left just as the Inquisition was imposed and the Jews were being kicked out of Spain. We believe that Columbus was Jewish and that he was a believer. He was a charismatic believer in Yeshua, but he was Jewish. And so he was trying to find a home for the Jews. That's why it was he was willing to lose his life potentially and his sailors' lives. So there were no blood moon tetrads on feast days in the 1500s. There was partials, but not a blood moon. In 1539, 1540, the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s. So really it's just 1493, 1494. So let's show that. Here it is, 1493, 1494, Passover, Sukkot, Passover, Sukkot. And other things were occurring that were very, very interesting. So there was a pattern going on that was equidistant, and we'll show you that in one of our much later videos. You'll see some really cool patterns from 2010 to 2019. Very interesting. But this is still an interesting setup to all of this as things were going on through the Reformation. And so Columbus was finding a home for the Jews. The blood moon math sequence. August 25th, and this is from Josh Elsom, he's a buddy of mine. August 25th, 1539, the rebuilding of the wall, plus 62 weeks equals June 7th of 67. So if you do the weeks out, which is very interesting, 62 weeks, which is like that Daniel 9 vision, capture of Jerusalem occurred in June 7th, and then Jerusalem becomes the capital of Israel for the first time in 1900 years. And then if you add the final 7 weeks, you get to September 28th, 2015, which is overlapping these eclipses that are going on during that time frame. So everything matches up. So you intersect the Jubilees and the 490s, and Josh did a great job of finding this eclipse pattern of 1539, 1540. And I keep on talking about it. Josh is kind of done now. He's a pastor down in Texas and having a good life. But I keep on doing this because I see the patterns, and he just saw the one pattern. So here's the Eastern Gate that you would see today. Suleiman the Magnificent built this. So Salem's son built this. And it's beautiful. What's underneath it? Well, let's talk about this first, and so you can see the graves and then come back to this guy. So the middle there, this is James Fleming. Okay, and so he's sitting between David Reagan, who runs a prophecy show, and Nathan Jones, who is the webmaster for the prophecy show. And so Nathan is from Georgia, and he was in Jerusalem in 1967. He was looking at that Eastern Gate, and he fell into the Muslim graveyard because it was raining. And he fell, and he had a camera. So there's the graveyard, and he fell into that. And this is the photo that he took. This shows that beneath the Eastern Gate, Suleiman just piled rubbish up against the other Eastern Gate, the original one that Yeshua walked through, and put bones, a graveyard right there, right up next to it, so that the Messiah would be the only one that could walk through. No Orthodox Jew is walking through a graveyard. Okay, it just doesn't happen. So the Messiah would have to come in flying to get through this. And so he set off prophecy in 1539, 1540 by doing all of these things. And we believe the lions were sent by God. Even though he did ask Allah about this, I don't have to reconcile it. I can just say it's all part of prophecy. So let's show you Ezekiel 44, 1 through 3, and show you how the prophecy fits. Then he brought me back by the way of the outer gate of the sanctuary, the one facing east, and it was shut. Adonai said to me, "This is the gate that will remain shut. It will not be opened, and no one will go through it, because Adonai, the God of Israel, had gone through it. Therefore, it was to be kept shut. Only the prince, see, since he is a prince, is to sit there to eat his meal before Adonai. He is to enter through the vestibule of the gate and leave the same way. Then he brought me through the north gate to the front of the house. I looked and saw Adonai's glory filling the house of Adonai and fell on my face." So Ezekiel tells us that only the Mashiach, only the Messiah, the Prince, could walk through this gate. And so that's what we're waiting for right now. That's what's going on. So now we're to the end, and I wanted to show you one more time these sequences. So now we're up to 1539, 1540, and there's from 1050 to 1540, if you see on the right-hand side, Suleiman the Magnificent is listed there, and he fits in so incredibly with prophecy, and he's somewhat similar to Cyrus in terms of Cyrus, was he a good guy or a bad guy? And Cyrus is compared to Trump. But the main thing is that it's the similarity that Suleiman did what God wanted him to do. The lion's dream forced it. And so I just want you to end up with that and see the similarities as we head through. And now we're into 1540. And we've discussed a little bit of the blood moon tetrads, and we've discussed some of the patterns going on and the prophecy from Judah ben Samuel. So thank you very much for your time. And this is the end of this video. So thank you.